Everything you've been told about Singapore is a lie. The media paints it as an authoritarian nightmare with no freedom, a sterile, soulless city where you get caned for chewing gum. What if I told you that narrative is carefully crafted propaganda designed to make you ignore the uncomfortable truth? Singapore isn't perfect, but it's nothing like what Western media wants you to believe. And the real story is far more threatening to the establishment. We're counting down the 5 things the media gets completely wrong about Singapore. And number 1 will make you question everything you've been fed about freedom, democracy, and the American way. Buckle up. Hit subscribe right now, because this channel doesn't do propaganda. We do truth. Let's expose the lies. 5. The chewing gum myth. Let's start with the famous one. You can't chew gum in Singapore, right? Wrong. You absolutely can chew gum in Singapore. You just can't sell it commercially or import it for sale, unless it's medicinal gum, which you can get from pharmacies. But tourists bring gum all the time. Nobody checks. Nobody cares. You won't get arrested for having gum. But here's why the media obsesses over this. It's easy clickbait that makes Singapore look absurd. Look at the crazy Asians banning gum. It reduces a sophisticated nation to a punchline. Meanwhile, the real story gets ignored. The gum ban came about because vandals were putting gum on subway doors, disrupting the entire train system. Singapore chose functionality over absolute freedom. You can debate whether that's right, but it's not insane. Compare this to America. You have the freedom to chew gum, but you can't drink alcohol in public in most cities. You can't jaywalk in many places, and try building anything without drowning in permits. Every society restricts certain freedoms for collective benefit. Singapore is just honest about it, while America pretends restrictions don't exist. The gum story is a distraction. It lets Western media mock Singapore while avoiding the uncomfortable question. Why is Singapore safer, cleaner, wealthier, and more efficient than virtually any Western city? That question threatens the narrative, so they talk about gum instead. But the gum myth is nothing compared to the freedom lie. 4. The freedom fabrication. Western media constantly calls Singapore authoritarian and claims Singaporeans have no freedom. Let me tell you what freedom actually looks like in Singapore. You can start a business in 24 hours with minimal bureaucracy. You can walk anywhere at 3 a.m. safely. Your kids can play outside unsupervised. You can practice any religion openly. You can travel anywhere without restrictions. You can become wealthy through merit regardless of your background. What you can't do is publicly criticize the government harshly, organize political protests easily, or access certain content the government deems harmful. That's the trade-off. Singaporeans traded political speech freedom for economic freedom, personal safety, and social mobility. And here's the part the media won't tell you. Most Singaporeans are fine with this deal. Walk through any American city and ask people if they feel free. They'll tell you about crushing debt, dangerous neighborhoods, failing infrastructure, and a government that doesn't work. Then ask a Singaporean. They'll talk about opportunities, safety, efficient services, and upward mobility. Who has more practical freedom? The American who can criticize the government but can't afford healthcare, or the Singaporean who keeps quiet politically but can build generational wealth? The media defines freedom purely as political speech, ignoring economic freedom, physical safety, and actual life outcomes. It's a narrow definition designed to make Western democracies look superior even as they crumble. Singapore exposes this lie. You can have prosperity, safety, and opportunity without Western-style democracy. That's heresy to the establishment, so they scream authoritarian and hope you don't look deeper. Freedom is more complex than the media admits. But that's not even the biggest lie they tell. 3. The diversity deception. Here's what the media won't tell you. Singapore is more diverse and more integrated than virtually any Western nation. The population is 74% Chinese, 13% Malay, 9% Indian, plus countless other ethnicities and religions. Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Christianity, all practiced openly and peacefully. When was the last time you heard about race riots in Singapore? Never. Because they solved the problem. Western media portrays itself as the champion of diversity and multiculturalism. But here's the reality. American cities are segregated by race and class. European nations struggle with immigrant integration. Meanwhile, Singapore legally mandates racial diversity in public housing. You cannot have ethnic enclaves. Every housing block must have a mix of Chinese, Malay, and Indian residents. Sounds authoritarian? Maybe. But it works. Singaporean kids grow up with neighbors from different races and religions. They attend schools together. They serve in the military together. Interethnic marriage rates are rising. Singapore achieved actual integration, while the West just talks about diversity and watches communities self-segregate. The media ignores this because it undermines their narrative. They want you to believe only Western-style democracy can handle diversity. Singapore proves that wrong. Forced integration through housing policy accomplished what decades of Western diversity initiatives failed to achieve. It's not perfect, but it's far more successful than the American model of separate neighborhoods and racial tension. Singapore doesn't just talk about diversity, it engineers it. And that's more threatening to Western ideology than any authoritarian label. But let's talk about the most dangerous lie of all. 2. The capitalism confusion. Western media calls Singapore ultra-capitalist, free market, libertarian paradise. That's completely wrong. Singapore is actually one of the most socialist, capitalist hybrids on Earth. And it works better than pure capitalism or pure socialism. But admitting this destroys both left-wing and right-wing Western narratives. Here's what Singapore actually does. The government owns 90% of the land. Over 80% of Singaporeans live in government-built public housing, which they can purchase but never fully own. It's a 99-year lease. The government runs massive sovereign wealth funds that invest globally. Healthcare is universal with mandatory savings accounts. The state controls key industries strategically. But here's the twist. Singapore is also intensely pro-business, low tax, and pro-wealth creation. Markets are free but guided. Capitalism is encouraged but controlled. It's not laissez-faire, and it's not a command economy. It's something the West refuses to categorize because it works. American conservatives can't celebrate Singapore's capitalism because of all the government control. American progressives can't celebrate Singapore's social programs because of the pro-business, low-tax environment. So the media from both sides either ignores the model or cherry-picks facts to fit their narrative. Singapore proves you can have strong government intervention and economic dynamism. You can have public housing and wealth creation. You can have social safety nets and low taxes. The model is pragmatic, not ideological. And that's exactly why Western media can't handle it. They need everything to fit into capitalism versus socialism boxes. Singapore breaks the boxes. The most successful economic model of the modern era doesn't fit Western political categories. So they pretend it doesn't exist or isn't replicable. That's intellectual dishonesty on a massive scale. Which brings us to the ultimate lie. The one that threatens everything the media believes. 1. The democracy delusion. Here's the truth that shatters Western ideology. Singapore proves democracy is not necessary for prosperity, freedom, or human flourishing. The People's Action Party has ruled Singapore since independence. Opposition exists, but has never won power. By Western standards, Singapore isn't truly democratic. And yet, Singaporeans are wealthier, safer, healthier, and by many measures, happier than citizens of most Western democracies. This is the ultimate heresy. The entire Western worldview is built on the idea that democracy is essential for good governance. Singapore demolishes that belief. It shows that competent meritocratic, results-focused governance can deliver better outcomes than messy, corrupt, inefficient democracy. Before you panic, I'm not saying democracy is bad. I'm saying it's not the only path to good outcomes. Singapore's model works because the government is competent, not corrupt, and focused on results rather than ideology. Western democracies increasingly lack all three qualities. The media can't admit this because their entire moral framework collapses. If democracy isn't essential for prosperity and freedom, then what's the West's claim to superiority? If authoritarianism in Singapore delivers better results than democratic America, what does that say about Western values? So instead of honest analysis, you get propaganda. Singapore is painted as an authoritarian nightmare to prevent you from asking uncomfortable questions. Why are Singapore's schools better? Why are their streets safer? Why is their government more efficient? Why do they have less inequality despite being more capitalist in some ways? The answer threatens everything. Maybe the system matters less than the execution. Maybe competence matters more than ideology. Maybe results matter more than process. Singapore's success isn't about freedom versus control. It's about whether your government actually works for citizens or just pretends to. Conclusion. So there it is, the chewing gum myth, the freedom fabrication, the diversity deception, the capitalism confusion, and the democracy delusion. Every narrative the media feeds you about Singapore is either wrong, misleading, or deliberately designed to prevent you from learning uncomfortable truths. Singapore isn't perfect, no country is. But it's nothing like what you've been told. Here's my question for you. Would you rather live in a free democracy where nothing works or a controlled system where everything works? That's the real choice Singapore forces us to confront. Drop your honest answer below. I want to see where people actually stand when ideology meets reality. If this video made you question what else the media is lying about, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe and turn on notifications because next week, we're exposing 3 other countries the media completely misrepresents. And the truth is even more shocking. Remember, the media doesn't inform you. It shapes you. Question everything.